Good evening and welcome to Real Talk, where every Sunday night we offer insight, education, and resources to in-home caregivers and those that are affected in their world. This is the children, the parents, the extended family, and anyone else that they come in contact with. Our goal is to offer real-life topics and learning through discussing these topics, discussing real issues, and offering real solutions to them. Tonight, I am excited to welcome back our guest, Rachel Lawrence with Homework Solutions. Rachel's been with us before, and we're happy to have you again.
Hi, Tanya.
Hi. So Rachel has been around the nanny and the newborn care specialist world for many years in a variety of capacities. Now, she works with Homework Solutions, specifically helping out agencies and helping all of us have a better understanding of the ins and the outs of the whole payment of in-home staff, taxes, that sort of thing. And she really knows her stuff. And tonight we're going to talk about kind of the benefits, fringe benefits, a total compensation package, what that all looks like. But before we jump into that, I also told Rachel ahead of time, I want her to tell us a little bit about one thing in particular, but what she's passionate about in our industry. And really things that it's having an impact, it's making a difference, and there's really going to be a long-term impact to this. So I know that you're a huge advocate, Rachel, for fair and legal pay. And so I'd love for you to tell us kind of what you're doing around that.
Sure. So, one of the amazing things that I've been able to do through my new position is to start an initiative that we called Fair and Legal Pay. And in my eyes, the best part of this initiative is the foundation of intent that it had. I certainly could have started this and had it just be connected to the company I work for. But that doesn't sell the message out to the general public. The message we wanted to give to this is the rising tide lifts all boats. And what better way to do that than to go to our direct competitors, to go to all of the major associations in the industry, and to go directly to the nannies, the NCSs, the families, the agency owners, the educators, everyone, and say, please join me. This is important. This creates a sense in our industry of not this is important to me or I do this as part of my job. This is us. This is important to us. And unless we all sort of draw a line in the sand and say our industry says do it right, they say we're professionals, then the message isn't heard. So I started this initiative about, I don't know, 6 months ago at this point, and it's tremendous the effect that we've had. We had no way of knowing that a pandemic would hit, which would drive this point even more home, sadly, because so many caregivers lost their opportunity that they had at work and needed to go to have unemployment, only to realize with being paid under the table, it wasn't the experience they thought it was going to be, and those sort of things. So this message and this initiative to make sure that, not just yourself, but the person next to you on the bench at the park or at a conference or whatever that is also being paid fair and legally, meaning that they're getting living wages, being, not being paid under the table. So they're getting Social Security benefits down the road. They're getting unemployment benefits if they need them, paid family medical leave where that applies with domestic workers' bills of rights. And those sort of things matters because we're all in this together.
Absolutely. And we obviously could not agree with you more. We were one of the early signers of that. We were on board instantly when we saw that. I've been a huge advocate for fair and legal pay for years. And when I first started really getting involved with the industry, was shocked to find the number of people who were not paid legally. It never occurred to me not to do it right and not to be paid legally and to do that. And around what our topic is going to be tonight, which is the complete compensation package and fringe benefits. And these are things that I've been in this industry. This is over 35 years now. And this is something right from the get go I've always asked for, always advocated for. And I'm shocked that in 2020 and the tail end of 2020, I'm still hearing from people who don't even get the basics, let alone fringe benefits. So we're going to talk about this tonight. And most of us have kind of an understanding that when we're going for a new position, we know the basic wage. You know, that's one of the things, whether it's an ad that we answer online or whether we're working through an agency or we're referred by somebody else, that's kind of one of the initial things we want to get out of the way. You know, what are they paying, right? But other benefits, it's one of the things people are uncomfortable talking about. They don't know what they can and can't ask for. And families don't know, nannies don't know, NCS don't know. So, are there ways that families can provide fringe benefits, other benefits beyond just the fair and legal pay?
Yep. So, yes, fair and legal pay, foundation level, right? You need to be paid for all of your hours worked overtime. That's a topic for another day that I could talk endlessly about. But let's talk about those other things, okay? You've already made sure those boxes are checked. But, this is your career. You want to make sure that you're getting some of those things that you hear your friends that are in the corporate space talking about. You want to have retirement someday. You want to have paid sick leave. You want to have um, contributions, if not fully paid health insurance, all of those sort of things. Reimbursements for expenditures that you have in relation to your job. All of those things are still possible in this space. Yes, you have to be brave enough to talk about them, but I think part of that starts with the fact of knowing what they are, knowing how they come into play in our space, knowing that they are, first of all, possible, and then secondly, the mechanism of how they're possible, because that information allows you to arm yourself to go into that conversation and feel like you're not sort of saying, well, I mean, if you could give me this, I would really like it. But to stand, tall, sit tall and say, you know, I have 20 years of experience in this industry and my usual compensation package includes X, Y, and Z. You're not asking for a favor. You're asking to be paid for the amazing services that you provide and that your experience makes you an expert and professional in.
Yep, I agree. And I tell people all the time that when I go into a negotiation with a family and I'm talking about the things that I want, I also phrase it very carefully. And you did a really good job of it. I do it very similarly. You do sit tall. You do need to stand tall because that conveys a message in and of itself. Body language is 70% of communication. So whether it's on a screen or whether it's in person, that is part of it because if you slump, you've already caved, right? But I will say to them, as an example, every single year, I like to attend the International Nanny Association conference. It's a great opportunity for me to learn new ways to serve your family. It's a great opportunity for me to network with other professionals in my industry that could potentially also help your family. It helps me with so many aspects of things. And so it is part of what I do every year. So I don't present it right from the get-go as an option. I tell them right from the get-go, this is something I do. And then when I'm negotiating the nuances of it, I ask them to pay for the whole thing. And you know what? For 20 plus years, I've had my conferences fully paid for by employers when I was working full time as a nanny and an NCS. So there are ways to do that for sure. That's a whole nother topic. Absolutely. In terms of just how to grow and develop that confidence and belief in yourself. But let's talk around those benefits specifically. Why would a caregiver or a family want to consider benefits other than wages? Hey, I'm paying you for the job and I'm paying you well. Why do I need to give you anything else?
Tanya, I'm pausing because you're going to have to cut this. My computer just told me it needs power, so I'm going to grab my cord really quick.
Okay, hang on.
So that's a really great question. A lot of people go into a negotiation and they think, I'm asking. This is all benefiting me. Why would they want to provide this to me? There are great reasons, besides the fact that we sometimes forget that the other person really wants to hire us and they want to recognize our professionalism and our hard work we put into the industry and reward us for it. There are great advantages to them as well. Some of these forms of compensation are tax advantaged to both sides, meaning this money that's allocated to something other than direct wages isn't taxed. And so they might be know about this, or maybe they don't. You need to educate them. But basically, you can go in saying, okay, if I'm looking at, I'll make up a number, $40,000 in wages. What if instead of taking $40,000 in wages, I took $35,000 in wages and $5,000 in a healthcare reimbursement? Okay, now the employee and the employer are only being taxed on 35,000 instead of taxed on 40,000. So it's actually good for both people involved to work these benefits in. So I know that sometimes it feels like an ask, but the truth is you could be providing an opportunity or an education for them to save some money in this endeavor as well. And you're still getting the same amount of compensation. Now you're also saving in taxes. And a lot of the times, it's a mechanism for you to get something else you need, like the health insurance or like the reimbursement for a conference, something you're going to do anyway, to have a better mechanism for it that rewards you, but also rewards them.
Mhm. And I love that you brought that up because so many times employers look at this and they think, what the heck? I'm already paying wages and I'm already paying taxes. And when there's an opportunity for them to understand that there's a way to do this that financially benefits them, that is huge. And a lot of times that's the tipping point between them agreeing to it and them not agreeing to it because they assume they're paying the taxes and everything on top of that many times. They don't understand it either. I mean, so many times I think nannies and NCS and others in this industry forget that these employers are very often employees of someone else themselves and they don't always understand. They're new to this. And even when they try and educate themselves, it doesn't mean they've always gotten all their information from a credible resource and they may not have all the information. So I love that you brought that up. So if someone is a nanny or an NCS, what benefits should they consider maybe asking for? What are things that they could talk about?
Sure. So, really, a lot of labor law and taxation is the same regardless of what industry you're in. Yes, there are nuances, and you should make sure you're getting credible information from credible sources that understand those nuances. But, we talk about the nanny tax, right? We hear about it in the media all the time. Oh, this politician, they didn't pay their nanny taxes, so now they can't be given this job. But the nanny taxes are just payroll taxes. It's the same payroll taxes everybody pays. So think of this in the same mechanism. Yes, we're a niche industry and there are nuances, but the truth is you can go into a total compensation package negotiation with the same general building blocks as anyone else. Your friend that works in the bank, or whatever other industry you might be thinking of. You can go in looking for retirement. You can go in looking for health insurance, health care benefits, however you want to put that. You can go in looking for reimbursements for expenses that you're going to naturally incur as part of this employment. You can go in looking for reimbursements for education and professional expenses, like Tanya mentioned before. There are lots of little things that you can build a compensation package on. And again, things like reimbursements often are tax advantaged for both sides. So if you can take back what you were looking at as a total all in number and work backwards from there to find a lower number of wages plus then all these add-ins back to that number. Great, everybody wins, everybody's paying less taxes. Or you might take a different tactic and you might say, no, if you're just paying wages, I'm a $40,000 or $60,000 or 80, whatever it is, $80,000 a year nanny, plus I want benefits on top of that that you aren't going to pay taxes on. Two different tactics, same sort of thing. You just have to decide, first of all, what benefits you're looking for, what's important to you, what isn't, what your market denotes. Different markets have very different dynamics to them, from everything from a wage to things like these reimbursements, and the knowledge base of the employers in that space. Not to say that you can't bring some more knowledge to that space, but take all of these things into consideration in knowing your audience, and then go in with the approach you're personally comfortable with. The person sitting next to you in this session may feel different about how to approach that. They may feel confident, not as confident. They may say, well, I feel healthcare is important, but I don't care about being reimbursed for part of my cell phone. Whatever it is, you have to figure out what's important to you. What is my audience like in this marketplace? And how do I feel comfortable approaching this topic? And I would always say, sort of know where your walkaway is. Sort of know if you love a family, but they won't provide X, Y, and Z. Are you still interested in negotiating other things? Or are you not interested in that family, no matter if they are the best family in the world? Know what are hard and fast rules for you and what are negotiation points. And I think it's okay to make those things relatively clear to the family. These are my walkaways. These are things we can find a middle ground on.
Mhm. Yeah, I absolutely agree. Years of doing this, years of experience of dealing with families, those all of those points are spot on. And I use a similar concept. I say, know where your line in the sand is, and know what would make you choose to say, not the right job for me. And some things are negotiable, some things are not. And for each of us, it's going to be different. It's just super important that we know what those things are for us personally. So if somebody's hearing this, whether they're a parent, whether they're a nanny, whether they're an NCS or another household staff member, they're probably thinking that this sounds kind of complicated. Is this as complicated as it might sound to some people? Or are there kind of easy ways to do this?
Yeah, so obviously it's going to depend on which benefit we're talking about, but my overall answer would be this is not as complicated as it feels. On a couple of them, is there some record keeping? Sure, but that's good employment practice anyway. If you worked for a bank and you took a client out to lunch, you wouldn't think anything about handing your boss the receipt when you got back and expecting to be reimbursed for that. Um, you would expect that your boss would say, great, please fill out this little half-page form and give me your receipt, right? This is the natural mechanism of a professional relationship. And the same is true here. So whether it's keeping track of your mileage for gas reimbursement, or the family wants you to have a Beltline pass so that you can get around town faster to take the kids places, or you want them to reimburse you for a professional organization, attending or education through that organization, all the way up through healthcare, there's, an easy mechanism for this. Let's take healthcare because that tends to be the one that people are really afraid of, right? So there's something called a QSARA. It's an acronym for something that is a complicated thing to say, a Qualified Small Employer Health Reimbursement Arrangement, which is why we have an acronym. And so the QSARA sounds big and scary. Essentially what it is, think of it in your brain more like a stipend or reimbursement, and that makes it a little less scary. So basically what it is the employee goes out and they get whatever health insurance plan that's ACH compliant, Affordable Care Act compliant, which basically everything is these days. And they determine, do I want a low premium and a high deductible? Do I want, the opposite? Whatever it is that fits you, You go out and pick it. So that's great, right? Your employer doesn't get to decide what kind of health coverage you get. Um, I would decide with your employer ahead of time, if it's possible, how much they're going to offer to reimburse you for it so that you sort of know what your budget is, and if it exceeds that budget, how much you're going to have out of pocket. But then go pick the plan that works for you. And then you come back and you say, here's my proof. I have health insurance. Here's a copy of my premium bill or whatever it is. And, best case scenario, you're proving this every fiscal quarter, so every 3 months to say, yep, still have it. Here it is. And the family's going to reimburse you for for one person, for an individual, for the year 2020, up to $5,250 a year for this. The family's not going to pay taxes on that money. You're not going to pay taxes on that money. And now you have health insurance. You're being reimbursed through the employer. You got to pick the health insurance. The employer's thrilled because they didn't have to do any of this, right? They didn't have to look at different plans and compare and try to make decisions for you. They're just saying, yep, looks like you have everything we need here, and then reimbursing you for it. Yes, there are some payroll implications to this where it should go in a different box on your W-2 so that it's all above board. And anyone who looked at this would say, okay, you've shown me that additional money changed hands, but you've also shown me what it was for and therefore wasn't taxed. So yes, are there some hoops? Yes, of course there are, but they are simple hoops. They're as simple as a photocopy in many cases that you're providing to your employer, or a couple paragraphs in your contract that spell all of this out. And the nice thing, particularly in the NCS world, if you ask me, or in this pandemic world where employment is less certain than it used to be, is that it's your plan. So if you stop working for this family, you can write it into your next contract. Your health insurance doesn't change. Your plan number doesn't change. You don't have to start from square one. You just carry that on over to your next job, and then you say, sitting up straight, I'm sorry, this is part of my total compensation package that I get at every job. And here's what it is. And this is why it's good for you to give it to me, because now you're paying less taxes too. So yeah, the simple answer is yes, there's upkeep with everything, but it's not as big and scary as it sounds.
Absolutely. And you kind of touched on my next kind of question around this is temporary workers, because newborn care specialists generally work shorter term jobs. Your traditional newborn care specialist job is usually up to 12 weeks. Sometimes there are clients that like us to stay for 6 or 9 months. Occasionally it turns into a long-term nanny job for some people. There are also a lot of temp nannies working, and a lot of private educators working, a lot of people working now in pandemic times in situations that are very different than they used to be. So your advice, if I heard you correctly, to them is have your own policy rather than an employer picking one out for you. Is there anything else kind of specific around that they should know?
I don't think specific around that, other than to speak to the sort of more nanny share pod environment that has, we'll say, blossomed in this environment. And a good thing to remember is that each family is your employer, independent of one another. The only place where they really overlap is minimum wage, which in our space really isn't that much of a thing anyway, because market value is usually much higher than minimum wage. But collectively, they can pay you minimum wage instead of each person paying you minimum wage, is really the only place in labor and taxation that these people overlap, which is shocking if you think about the actual care taking place. It seems like there would be connections all over the place, but there isn't. And so each person should be paying you separately, giving you a separate pay stub. They should give you a separate W-2 at the end of the year. All of these things should be separate. Now, here's the really fun part about this, is in the QSERA world, that means that each family could theoretically max out that $5,250 a year. Now, you do get to a tipping point where it's pretty hard to spend that much on health care, but it's something to think about when you go into one of these private educator pod nanny share environments, is because they're already splitting costs other places and wanting to save tax money and not spend it. maybe this is a really good place to play something like reimbursements, because each family has more play there and they can, seemingly collectively as a group offer you more. Obviously, you can't double dip, right? You can't say I have a $300 cell phone bill and I think 150 of that applies to my nanny life or my NCS life and want to be reimbursed for it. So family A is going to do 150 and family B is going to do 150 and family C is going to do 150, because now you're over what you paid for your cell phone bill anyway, right? But with healthcare, if you're really spending it on healthcare, or you take that $150 and you do 50, 50, 50, now maybe they can hear that better, because each family says, I could do $50 a month towards reimbursing you for your cell phone, or I could do $100 a month for reimbursing for health insurance. And maybe they couldn't hear that if they were an independent employer outside of these collective groups, because 300 sounds like a lot that they couldn't do. So I would say, if anything, this has opened up to the possibility of more benefits.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree with you on that. That's amazing. I didn't even realize that that could be done that way. And I know a fair amount around this
You
topic.
do know a fair amount around this topic.
Um, so that's amazing. One thing that I should have addressed from the beginning, and I'm going to ask you to address it now, and I'm going to tell you why. So I'm in a lot of parenting groups because I'm a parent, and I'm in a lot of groups because we serve so many other states, because I live and work in other states, depending on what I'm doing. There's a lot of different things out there, right? I don't live there long term. I'm just there temporarily, but I'm involved in a lot of groups. And one of the things that I see a lot is I see a lot of pushback from people who we get the, what do you mean? I went to college and I paid for college and I paid for an advanced degree and I'm only making $100,000 a year. And you think you should make $80,000 a year as a nanny, and you expect me to pay you overtime, and you're expecting me to pay you benefits on top of that? So, for everybody in our audience, could you just really quickly touch on why a household employee, why a nanny or an NCS is a household employee, and why they are subject to overtime laws, why parents are doing things illegally if they're not paying nannies legally, if they're not getting that done right?
Yes. So there's sort of two parts to this. One, I would say, a step below this even is the 1099 talk. People say, oh, I was around the water cooler and Cindy Smith told me that I can pay my nanny as an independent contractor and then I don't have to pay employment taxes because I'm not really her employer. We've just hired her to do a job. Unfortunately, your friend around the water cooler either totally doesn't understand or doesn't understand all the pieces that go into that. So, in almost all nanny situations, in some NCS situations, and in my opinion, in many of these pod situations, the family is controlling the employment. They're telling you when to come, what to do. No, you can't send in your friend who's equally qualified as a substitute. So they're your employer. So let's just take 1099 right on off the table for those sort of situations. And so, because they want to pay you by the job as a 1099, they don't want to pay their taxes. And I get that, right? Who wants to do this extra paperwork and go through these extra steps? I work in the tax field. It doesn't mean that I like sign all my tax checks with a smiley face, right? It's not something I want to do either, but I understand its value, so I do. And so the second part to that is the overtime conversation, and it has similar threads, right? People want to just say, I don't want to keep up with the books, I don't want to count hours, I don't want to do 15 minutes here and 15 minutes there, can't we just bank some hours? All of these things. I get the theory, right? Mother of three right here, would not have survived without nanny and NCS help. So I get it. You don't want one more thing to keep track of. However, federal law very, very clearly states that nannies are the hourly employees of the families that they work for. Again, in the NCS space, you've sort of picked your bucket on this. You can see another talk that I did with Tanya if you want to know a little bit more about that. But if you've chosen to be the employee, this is also the case. It needs to be based on an hourly number. That hourly number has to be at least minimum wage. which again in our marketplace is usually not an issue, but nonetheless. And then you have to be paid overtime for any hours that you work that fall into what they call an overtime differential. The federal overtime differential is 40 hours in a 7-day work week. And no, you cannot pick these 7 days this week and then those 7 days and move it around so that no overtime occurs. It needs to be a mutually agreed upon consistent work week. So Monday through Sunday, Friday through Thursday, doesn't matter how you set that up, but it's 7 consecutive days. And so federal law is 40 hours. There are state laws, namely California, that come into play that have also a daily overtime. They say, listen, yeah, it's great that you give somebody overtime that works 41 hours a week, but what if they only work 3 days a week, but they work really long hours? That person, maybe deserves overtime too. So they've set these overtime rates on the daily level too. And in California specifically, it has to do with what kind of work you're doing. So California has a personal attendant law where daily overtime is at 9 hours, anything above 9 hours. And a personal attendant spends at least 80% of their time caring for someone else. So that goes from babies to senior care, right? On the whole spectrum. But think of what you would do to care for someone, provide personal care and assistance to them, feeding, bathing, dressing, general supervision of safety and life quality. Those are hallmarks of that. The other 20% you could do are things that are household related, laundry, errands, etc. But you have to keep it below 20% of your job or you're not a personal attendant. If you have a job that, let's say you're a nanny house manager, and 50% of your job is household stuff, and 50% of it is personal care, you do not fall under this law. So when do you get daily overtime? You get it at 8 hours in a day instead of 9 hours because you're a more traditional employee. You're not a personal attendant to somebody's care. The kicker about this is that you don't just say, great, we did state law, now we're all done. Federal law comes in too. If you're using the 9-hour rule and you're working 5 days, on that 5th day, you trip federal overtime. So even though you've played along the whole time and kept it at 8 hours and 45 minutes every day, that's great until the 5th day when you cross into federal overtime. So why is it important? Because of the work that we do and the labor protections that have been afforded to you. This is not an attaboy. This is not a free win because we have to classify you as an hourly employee. This is a formula. This is about the kind of work that you do. You're on your feet all day. Those sort of things. There's a reason that overtime laws exist. And it's something that you are due, not something that is a fringe benefit, if you will.
Absolutely. Thank you for addressing that because this question does, I see it every single day in a variety of different groups. And I even hear it amongst caregivers who don't understand how it all works. So,
Well, and I would say to that, Tanya, like sometimes you hear the caregiver say, I don't want to be hourly, I want a salary. And there is this perception in our country to some extent that a salary is a higher level position, which I think is completely silly. But so let's say the family wants to pay you $70,000 a year and you want $70,000 a year and you're both ticked that the federal law exists. So work with that. Work with your mutual point. Okay, we both agree 70,000 is what we're aiming for. And then assess what work will be done. I expect that a normal week will be 42 hours a week. And then work backwards from there to get a guaranteed number of hours, is what we call it. It, in essence, feels like a salary, but it's a salary up until the moment those 42 hours expire. And then when mom's on a business trip that week, or whatever the scenario is, and you work 45, they owe you extra money. You're still maintaining the law and its intention and practicing the benefit to you, and also coming together at that mutually agreed upon point of 70,000 to make the normal weeks feel in essence like a salary. But you can't sign away your right to labor law. You can't say, yes, I know I'm due overtime, but I don't want it. You can't, it's like No one would think you could do that for a hitman. No one would say, oh, but we had a contract. It's totally fine if I had them kill my next door neighbor, right? Like, that's silliness. Like, I'm speaking flippantly when I say that. So the same is true in your contract. You can't sign away your rights to things that are guaranteed to you, nor should you.
I love that you brought that up too, because that was kind of my final point where I was going to go with things. So that's awesome.
We're always right here, Tanya. Always right.
Exactly. So you have shared a ton of information with us tonight. I would love, we're obviously going to put Homework Solutions information in the feed so that people can reach out to them. But as kind of your final thing that you share, will you just give us a really brief snippet of why a family would want to consider a service like Homework Solutions?
Sure. So I have conversations with household employers all the time. People that are first-time household employers and people that have been around the block a few times. And I will say rarely does a conversation go by where the household employer doesn't learn something. And that's not to say, like, I am so amazing and I know so many things. It's to say that this is complicated and it is ever changing. The pandemic has certainly exacerbated that. And, we could have new legislation next week that I don't even know about now. Um, it's important that these foundations of how we work together are something we don't have to think about and stress about, and setting those up professionally in a work agreement and with something like a professional payroll company or a skilled CPA that understands household employment labor law is really important, because now you don't have to think about that. Now it's all about the childcare team. Now you don't wonder if you have the 4th of July off or not, or if you're getting paid overtime or not. It takes all that mud out of the water and lets you focus on what you're really there to do and what the family really wants you to do. And so I think that's important. And I also think it's important to have somebody knowledgeable, because you deserve it, for lack of a better way to put that. Because you are a professional in a professional industry that, in many ways, if you've ever listened to Agent Pooh or someone like that speak about domestic work, it is the foundation of all other work. Those doctors, those lawyers, those teachers, those bankers, whoever it is, they can't go to work if they don't have childcare. What we do is the cornerstone of our society. It's the cornerstone of the women's liberation movement. It's so many things. It's so important, and I think we lose sight of that sometimes. And we think like, oh, well, I don't know, they're paying me okay, I should just let that be. But we are the foundation of American society in many ways. And I think that us saying, no, I will be paid over the table, I will be paid a living wage, I should expect fringe benefits, and all of these other things, are us realizing that in ourselves and collectively saying, well, of course we do these things. You would never you would never have a CPA or a C-suite level corporate person or a teacher or anyone not expect those things. So yeah, you expect to be paid legally on time and afforded all of the things that you're afforded under the law.
Absolutely. So we have covered a ton tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. It's, as always, a pleasure to have you on and to learn with you. If you are watching this and you have questions for Rachel about this topic or anything around the tax issues as a caregiver or as an employer, please feel free to reach out to her or the other amazing staff at Homework Solutions. Their contact information is in the feed. You can reach out to them. They are a fantastic and very knowledgeable resource. So thank you, Rachel. We really appreciate it.
Anytime, Tanya.
Absolutely. We love it. So if you're wanting to rewatch this segment or catch any of our other Real Talk episodes, along with accessing our other content, pop on over to newborncaresolutions.com and click on the Education tab, where you can find this, all past Real Talks, lots of other free resources, and our courses. Have a great evening, and thank you for joining us. Good night.